It's very nice to have you clicking on here. You're obviously concerned about government, which is why you've tuned in. Well, there's a word much worse than communism, socialism, fascism. The word is collectivism. You're going to learn about that word and how it disrupts a lot of things and how it's in control all over the place.
Now, this is for both of you. It's kind of a broad question. You know, you talk about prefabricated homes, and people automatically think, you know, trailer parks, and they think, you know, that everyone will be the same. Everyone will be regimented. What is this fear of this loss of individuality?
Well, first of all, you don't have individuality. That's a myth. If you had individuality, it couldn't be wars. There'd be thousands of different political parties, not just the Democrats and Republicans. And you've never had a democratic society. All that's an illusion.
Because that word collectivism, although it's certainly in the dictionary, and it was used quite a bit in historical documents, current history documents of a century ago, it's almost vacant from the modern vocabulary. Collectivism, as you just said in your introduction, is the underlying general ideology that is common to so many of the totalitarian systems of modern times. Communism, fascism, Nazism, all three of those have as their underpinning certain common elements to an ideology that really, they're the only things that you should be looking at. The names communism, fascism, Nazism, so forth, are just labels, but they don't describe anything. Collectivism is what we're talking about. So what is collectivism? We don't have time for all of it, but we've been able to identify certain common components. One of them is the idea that the group is more important than the individual, and that the individual, if necessary, must be sacrificed for the greater good of the greater
Peter
number.
Joseph of the Zeitgeist movement has never called for violence or coercion, and I've never accused him of calling for violence and coercion. However, if his followers ever get the chance to put the philosophy that he advocates into action, it will lead to violence. Now, in order to understand why, you have to take a good, hard, honest look at property rights. Now, the obvious problem which arises when you look at their prescription, which calls for 100% control of the world's resources, is that those resources are on land, and that land is owned by people. Now, the underlying question, which should be very obvious, I keep proposing to people in the comment section, what do you do to the people who don't want to actually give up their property, whether that property is land, factories, or any other kind of infrastructure? Now, most people try to skirt around the issue, but I got a couple comments that were actually pretty honest. Now, this comment was posted by Evil Genius 747, and he answers, what about the people who want to keep the land for themselves? And in big capital letters he writes, the needs of the many outweigh the needs of the few. Now, I'm going to gloss over the fact that this is a quote from a science fiction series, and I'm going to jump right into the implications of what this guy is actually saying. Now, what you're making really clear here is that you don't care about property rights, and that if you want something, you're going to come and take it because you're with the many and I'm with the few, and you got needs. Now, if you really can't see how this would lead to violence, then maybe you should come to Texas and give it a little trial run. And there was another comment posted by World Watch 100, which makes it ever so clear what's at stake here. And he writes, unfortunately, people like you will be forced to participate in the resource-based economy, the same way that billions of people are forced to participate in a deadly monetary system. All right, now that we got it out in the open, how? How are you going to force me to comply? You guys are going to face armed resistance. So are you going to build an army? Do you have the guts to pull the trigger? Because that's what it's going to take. And you do realize if it comes to that, then your whole idea of being a non-violent, voluntary society is out the window. You will have just created a violent, totalitarian dictatorship of epic proportions. Now, it seems to me that you guys have the impression that this is going to have a better outcome if it all goes down after rule of law is gone. And I actually have a comment here that was posted on that video which pretty clearly illustrates that perspective. And this was posted by World at Large 77. And he says, you obviously don't get the point of the documentary. If people don't give up their ideas of ownership and don't feel like converting to a more singular and community-based world, your opinion won't even exist, because you'll be dead. This species is doing a pretty shitty job of maintaining its future. Now, the fact that you would say something like this in itself is pretty revealing, but I'm going to give you the benefit of the doubt and just deal with your argument at face value. Where on earth did you get the idea that you and the Zeitgeist followers are somehow going to survive this cataclysm that's heading our way, while people like me, who believe in personal liberty and property rights, would just be dead? You see, I own farmland. I have heirloom seeds. I've worked on farms. I was raised hunting and fishing. I know how to recognize edible plants. And I have the means and the will to defend my property and my family if it ever comes to that, and I hope it doesn't. So what about you? How prepared are you for what's coming? I get the impression, based on your comments, that you guys aren't preparing at all. I also get the impression that you wouldn't know how to find or produce food for yourselves in a natural environment. By my calculations, the people who think like me, who take responsibility for their livelihood, are much more likely to survive. The way I see it, if you see this disaster coming and you're doing nothing to get ready for it, then that's just irresponsible. And if you think you're going to get by just taking from other people what they've accumulated during this time that they're preparing, then that's criminal. The thing is, a scenario like that will lead to violence, whether you say you want violence or not. And if it's you that's walking onto someone's land with the intention of taking it, then you really don't have much room to complain when you end up getting shot. And really, I'm doing you guys a favor by telling you this, because that's how it would end. You may not care about property rights, but you're not the one with the property. Now, there's a pretty common response that people keep coming back to me with in the personal messages and the comments, and I have a pretty good example of it right here in this comment that was posted by Colleen FR. And she says, question is, why would you not want to live in a resource-based economy? Then we can continue our conversation. No. Someone you don't know walks up to you, asks you for the keys to your car. You say no, and then they demand an explanation? Quite frankly, I'm astounded that you would think that that's a tenable position. No one should have to justify why they don't want the fruits of their labor taken from them. That should just be common sense. But you know, common sense seems to be pretty lacking in the religion that the Zeitgeist movement has become. Now let's just take a second and review the facts at hand and see how we got here. Fact number one, the resource-based economy calls for and requires 100% control of all the world's resources, production, and distribution. And all this would be run by some kind of supercomputer. Fact number two, the infrastructure that you would need to take control of in order to do this is already owned by somebody else. And to get from point A, which is where we are right now, to point B, which would be this total control system, either somehow magically all of us who don't believe in the Zeitgeist vision suddenly die off, leaving you guys behind untouched, or you're going to have to take our land. You're going to have to take our factories. You're going to have to take our mines and our farms, our stores, and even our equipment. And if you don't think that that's going to lead to violence, you're in for a very rude awakening.
An often debated topic in the Zeitgeist movement is how many people we need to reach in order to make the vision of the Venus Project a reality. So, I did a little statistical analysis to break this down. I looked at the top 25 wealthiest nations in the world, from the United States all the way down to Austria. Why? Because it's basically these nations that determine the ebb and flow of global economics. These nations also have the kind of education in their populations that would be most capable of understanding what the Venus Project is all about. The poorest people in the world don't care what new system we implement, nor are they really connected to the circumstances that affect their lives. They're getting screwed every day, so they'll be happy with any change that betters their lives. It might as well come from us. Anyway, using the most recent population data I could find, I totaled the populations of these nations and arrived at just over 4.2 billion people. Next, I shaved off the top 10% of each nation, representing the wealthiest people that probably wouldn't be too happy about killing the monetary system. This added up to just over 423 million people. Then, I went nation by nation and found the most recent poverty rate data I could for that nation. Most of the data was from 2005 and 2006. It was hard to find anything more recent, although some nations were updated as far as 2009. Sources included the World Health Organization and the UN, and the totals ended up being just over 976 million people. After taking this into account, the revised total was just over 2.8 billion people, a far cry less than the real planetary total. Now, how many of those people do you think we really need to reach? What's the tipping point? Half of this will be just over 1.4 billion. 40%, 1.1 billion. 30%, 851 million. 25% would be at 709 million. Here's something to chew on. If you get 25 to 30% of any group sample size to agree to a particular idea publicly, it can end up influencing the remainder of the group pretty easily. Peer pressure, if you will.
Now, as I've said many times, that is something that I learned in
The only time
school.
that we'll ever ask for donations as the movement is when we have a big project that needs to move forward. And we have no projects like that now. We're in a period of collecting people and streamlining functionality.
So, I got to hear that by 2050 we're gonna have like around 9 billion people live in the world. And knowing that there is already a lot of people who doesn't have a job, actually, that doesn't collaborate for their society whatsoever. And in this efficient kind of system will be like less and less people needed in order to make the whole machinery work. There's going to be a lot of people without doing anything, but you still need a lot of people who run the machinery by maintenance and
of course.
on all kind of stuff. So who decides, or what decides, or how can you involve people to make them, or who's going to work, who's not going to work?
Yeah, great question. And my joke answer when someone asks me that, usually that question comes with a more cynical tone. And they say, well, who's going to run the machines? I go, I do. And that usually shuts them up. Because do we have to do everything for money? Do we not realize that the whole world is our home? Why can't we think about our entire city in the same way we think about our home? We take care of our home. People take care of their local environment. They don't want it to be filthy and overrun with vermin and everything else. So why not have that exact same concept applied to your city? Why not have that exact same concept of caring and necessity applied to the whole world? It's not that far-fetched. And unfortunately, this system reinforces the exact opposite because of its individualism and propensity for separation.